While cleaning son's grave, father noticed a weird hole. What happens next is shocking. The metal bristles of David Mitchell's brush scraped against granite, each stroke removing another layer of grime from his son's headstone. 27 months of Sundays spent here at Oak Grove Cemetery, and still the pain felt as fresh as morning dew on grass. The October wind carried the first bite of winter, rustling through the maple trees that lined the cemetery's winding paths, their leaves a blazing canvas of red and gold. "Almost done, Tommy," David murmured, his voice barely audible above the whisper of falling leaves. He reached into his cleaning kit, a repurposed tackle box now filled with brushes, cloths, and the special stone cleaner recommended by the Memorial Company, and pulled out a softer brush for the final touches. The morning sun caught the golden letters of Thomas James Mitchell's name, making them shine like new coins against the polished black stone. David had been an engineer before retirement, and he approached this weekly ritual with the same precision he'd once applied to bridge calculations. Each corner needed exactly 12 strokes. The dates required special attention to prevent buildup in the deeper grooves. Born March 15, 1995, died July 8, 2023. 20 years old. Too young. Always too young. As he worked his way down to the base of the headstone, something caught his eye, a slight depression in the soil, maybe 3 inches in diameter. In his previous visits, he noticed similar disturbances. The cemetery grounds were home to various burrowing animals. But this hole was different. Its edges were too clean, too deliberate. David set down his brush and leaned closer, his knees cracking as he shifted position. The morning dew had darkened the soil, making it easier to spot irregularities. This wasn't a fresh hole. The edges were weathered, suggesting it had been there for some time. But why hadn't he noticed it before? Using his gardening trowel, another essential tool in his cleaning kit, David gently probed the depression. The soil gave way easily, as if it had been recently disturbed. 3 inches down, the trowel struck something solid. Not a rock. The sound was wrong. This was plastic, or maybe metal. His heart began to pound as he carefully widened the hole. Years of working with precise measurements had given him steady hands, but now they trembled slightly as he brushed away the loose dirt. A glint of black plastic emerged, then a glass lens, and finally the entire object came free, a small camera, roughly the size of a golf ball, its housing weatherproof against the elements. "What in God's name?" David whispered, turning the device over in his hands. It was sophisticated, not some cheap surveillance camera from a hardware store. This was professional grade, with a high-capacity battery pack and what appeared to be a motion sensor above the lens. Most disturbing of all, its position had given it a perfect view of Tommy's grave. David's mind raced. Who would plant a camera here? The cemetery had security cameras at its entrances, but nothing this elaborate near individual graves. Had someone been watching them? Recording their private moments of grief? He checked the camera more carefully and found a small SD card slot on its side. The card was still inside, protected from the elements by rubber seals. David's hands shook harder as he pocketed both the camera and the memory card. In his 30-year career as an engineer, he'd learned that nothing was ever truly random. Every anomaly had an explanation, every deviation a cause. But this felt wrong in a way that made his skin crawl. The drive home seemed longer than usual, each traffic light an eternity, as scenarios played through his mind. Should he call the police? The cemetery administration? His wife Ellen was visiting their daughter in Seattle. Should he wait until she returned? The weight of the camera in his jacket pocket felt like a live coal. Their house was exactly as he'd left it 2 hours ago, dishes from his solitary breakfast still in the sink, morning paper folded on the kitchen table, Ellen's coffee cup sitting empty by her favorite chair. But now the familiar space felt different, charged with the potential energy of the discovery he made. David's home office had once been Tommy's bedroom. After the funeral, Ellen had wanted to preserve it exactly as it had been, but David couldn't bear the sight of those teenage posters, the track trophies, the unmade bed. Instead, they'd compromised. The furniture was new, but Tommy's photos still lined the walls, watching over David as he worked. With trembling fingers, he connected his laptop to its charging station and inserted the camera's memory card. A window popped up showing dozens of video files, each labeled with dates and timestamps. The earliest was from 3 months ago. David clicked on the first file. The video quality was exceptional, even in the low light of dawn. He watched himself cleaning the headstone, completely unaware of being recorded. The next file showed Ellen placing fresh flowers, her lips moving in silent conversation with their son. Then came Tommy's high school friends, leaving small mementos, baseball cards, ticket stubs, inside jokes written on scraps of paper. But it was the night footage that made David's blood run cold. A figure appeared, moving with purpose through the darkness. Unlike the other visitors who approached the grave openly, this person constantly looked over their shoulder, as if afraid of being seen. They would kneel briefly, dig something into the soil, and hurry away. David checked the timestamps. The mysterious visitor had come exactly 7 times, always between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., always following the same pattern. The most recent visit had been just 3 days ago. "Oh, Tommy," David whispered to his son's smiling face on the wall. "What secrets did you take with you?" He reached for his phone, then stopped. Who could he trust with this? The police would want to know how he found the camera. The cemetery administration might accuse him of tampering with the grounds. And Ellen? Ellen had only recently started sleeping through the night again. No, David decided, pushing back from his desk. Before involving anyone else, he needed to understand what he was dealing with. He turned back to the laptop and opened the next video file. Frame by frame, he would piece together this puzzle. Every mystery had a solution. He just had to find the patterns, follow the evidence, and uncover the truth. But deep in his gut, a cold certainty was taking root. His son's death hadn't been the simple tragedy they'd all accepted. Someone had been keeping watch over Tommy's grave, and David was beginning to suspect they had a very good reason to do so. Sleep eluded David that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that shadowy figure from the surveillance footage, moving through the darkness like a guilty ghost. Around 3 a.m., he gave up trying to rest and returned to his office, the soft glow of his laptop screen casting strange shadows on Tommy's photographs. The video files were organized by date, each one a small window into the private grief of those who visited Tommy's grave. David had already watched the first few, but now he settled in for a thorough investigation, notepad at hand, old habits from his engineering days dying hard. He created a spreadsheet to track the visitors. Ellen came on Wednesdays and Saturdays, usually around 10 a.m. Tommy's high school sweetheart, Sarah, visited monthly, always leaving origami cranes, a hobby Tommy had teased her about when they dated. The track team held a small memorial on what would have been his birthday, leaving their old team photo and their state championship medal. But it was the nighttime visitor who commanded David's attention. The figure appeared like clockwork, roughly every 2 weeks. Despite the camera's high resolution, their features remained frustratingly obscured. They wore a hooded jacket and kept their head down, as if aware they might be watched. "Let's see what you're hiding," David muttered, opening a video enhancement program he'd downloaded hours earlier. The software allowed him to adjust brightness and contrast, revealing details hidden in shadow. He selected the clearest footage, from 2 weeks ago, and began making adjustments. The enhanced video showed more than before. The visitor was male, probably in his late 20s or early 30s, judging by his build and movement. He carried something in his right hand, a small trowel, similar to the one David used for cleaning. But most intriguingly, he wore expensive running shoes, their distinctive red soles catching the moonlight. David's breath caught. He remembered those shoes. Tommy had coveted a pair just like them, but they cost nearly $300. "When I make partner at the firm," he joked at their last family dinner. "I'll buy us matching pairs, Dad." The video showed the man kneeling by the grave, carefully digging a small hole. From his pocket, he withdrew what looked like a piece of paper, folded multiple times until it was tiny enough to fit in the palm of his hand. After burying it, he touched the headstone, almost reverently, before hurrying away. David checked the timestamp. 2:47 a.m., exactly 3 weeks ago. Without hesitation, he grabbed his car keys. The drive to Oak Grove Cemetery took 15 minutes, the streets empty except for delivery trucks preparing for their morning routes. The cemetery gates were locked, but David knew about the maintenance entrance around back. He'd seen the groundskeepers use it countless times during his Sunday visits. The padlock was secured, but the chain was loose enough to allow him to squeeze through the gap. Any other time, he might have felt guilty about trespassing. Not tonight. His flashlight beam cut through the pre-dawn darkness as he made his way to Tommy's grave. The grass was heavy with dew, soaking through his shoes, but David barely noticed. Using the video as reference, he located the spot where the mysterious visitor had buried his message. The soil was still loose. David dug carefully with his trowel until he struck paper. The note was wrapped in plastic, protection against the elements. His hands trembled as he unwrapped it. The paper was expensive, the kind used for legal documents. The message was short, written in precise handwriting. "I can't keep lying. The guilt is eating me alive. But if I tell the truth now, everything falls apart. I'm sorry, Tommy. I'm so damn sorry." David sat heavily on the damp grass, his mind spinning. The official report had been clear. Tommy had lost control of his car on a rainy night, striking a tree at high speed. A tragic accident, but not uncommon on that winding road. The police had found no evidence of foul play, no reason to dig deeper. But now, he returned to the spot where he'd found the camera and began searching the surrounding area. 20 minutes of careful examination revealed 2 more buried notes, each sealed in plastic. The first was older, the ink slightly faded. "They say time heals all wounds. They're wrong. It just teaches you to live with the pain, with the knowledge of what we did." The second note was more recent, the plastic still clean. "I saw your mother today. She was buying flowers, roses, your favorite. She looked right through me, no idea who I was. No idea what I know. Sometimes I think about telling her everything. But would the truth hurt more than the lie?" David's hands shook as he pocketed the notes. The sky was beginning to lighten, the first birds starting their morning songs. Soon the groundskeepers would arrive. He needed to leave, but his mind was racing. The precise handwriting. The expensive paper. The high-end running shoes. These weren't the marks of some random person consumed by guilt. This was someone educated, probably professional. Someone who had known Tommy well enough to know his favorite flowers, to care about his mother's grief. Back home, David spread the notes on his desk, alongside printouts of the video stills. The handwriting tickled something in his memory, but he couldn't place it. He opened his laptop again, this time pulling up photos from Tommy's law school graduation 2 years before his death. Tommy stood proud in his cap and gown, surrounded by classmates. David had taken dozens of pictures that day, capturing the celebration from every angle. He began zooming in on faces in the background, looking for anyone who matched the build of the mysterious visitor. A notification popped up on his screen, an email from Ellen. She was having a wonderful time in Seattle with their daughter Amy, but she missed him. Attached was a photo of their grandson playing in autumn leaves. David's heart clenched. How could he tell her about any of this? The morning sun was streaming through his office window now, illuminating Tommy's photos on the wall. In one, he was perhaps 12, grinning proudly beside a science fair project. In another, he was in his track uniform, medal around his neck. And there, on his desk, the last photo ever taken of him, at a law firm party just days before his death. David froze, staring at the image. In the background, partially obscured but still visible, was a man wearing those same distinctive red-soled shoes. "Got you," David whispered, reaching for his phone. It was time to make some calls, ask some questions. Someone knew the truth about Tommy's death, and David was going to find out who, no matter the cost. The law firm of Whitaker, Chen and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of downtown's most prestigious office building. David sat in his car across the street, studying the steady stream of people entering through the revolving glass doors. Each one carried the same sharp attaché cases, wore the same expensive suits. Any of them could be the mysterious visitor, the person who knew the truth about Tommy's death. The photo from the law firm party had given him a direction, but not a name. He'd spent hours zooming in, enhancing, trying to get a clear view of the man's face. All he could determine was that it was someone young, likely one of Tommy's colleagues from the firm's junior associate program. David checked his watch, 9:45 a.m. He'd called the firm earlier, using his most professional voice to schedule an appointment with human resources. The pretext was simple. He was gathering information for a scholarship in Tommy's name. It wasn't entirely a lie. He and Ellen had discussed such a possibility in the months after their son's death. The security desk directed him to the 47th floor. As the elevator climbed, David's reflection in the polished doors showed a man he barely recognized, hair carefully combed, wearing the suit he'd bought for Tommy's funeral. The irony wasn't lost on him. "Mr. Mitchell?" The HR director, Patricia Wong, greeted him warmly. "I was so sorry to hear about Thomas. He was one of our most promising associates." David forced a smile, noting how she used the past tense, was, not is. As if Tommy had simply changed jobs, not died. "Thank you. We're hoping this scholarship will help other young lawyers follow in his footsteps." "Of course." She gestured to a chair. "What information can I provide?" "I'm particularly interested in Tommy's peer group," David said carefully. "The other junior associates he worked with. We'd like to establish the scholarship criteria based on their collective achievements." Patricia tapped at her keyboard. "Thomas was part of our 2023 associate class. There were 12 of them total." She turned her monitor, showing a group photo. "This was taken at their orientation." David leaned forward, heart pounding. The image showed Tommy standing among his colleagues, all wearing identical navy suits and eager smiles. His eyes scanned the faces, looking for anyone who matched the build of the grave visitor. "Do you have a list of their names?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. "Certainly." She began reading them off. "James Whitaker Jr., the founding partner's son, of course. Marcus Chin, Andrew Peterson, Sarah Liu." David's pen moved across his notepad, recording each name. "Did any of them leave the firm recently?" Patricia paused. "Yes, actually. Marcus Chin resigned about 2 months after Thomas's accident. Said he needed a fresh start. And James Jr. took a leave of absence around the same time, though he's back now." Marcus Chin. The name stirred something in David's memory. He'd seen Marcus at the funeral, standing at the back of the church, face pale and drawn. Tommy had mentioned him occasionally. They'd worked on cases together, sometimes grabbing drinks after long days at the office. "Would you happen to have contact information for Mr. Chin?" "I'm sorry, that would be against company policy." Patricia's smile remained professional, but her eyes had grown wary. "Is there something specific you're looking for, Mr. Mitchell?" David backtracked smoothly. "Just trying to be thorough." Tommy spoke highly of his colleagues. "I want to make sure the scholarship honors that camaraderie." After collecting some generic recruiting materials, David left the office. But instead of heading to the elevator, he made a detour toward the restrooms. The floor plan he'd memorized from the building's website showed that the junior associates' offices were down the next corridor. The nameplates on each door told their own story. James Whitaker Jr., corner office. Andrew Peterson, senior associate. Sarah Liu, senior associate. He paused at an empty office, its nameplate recently removed. Through the glass wall, he could see boxes stacked against bare walls. "Can I help you?" David turned to find a young woman watching him suspiciously. Her nameplate identified her as Sarah Liu. "I'm David Mitchell," he said quietly. "Tommy's father." Her expression softened immediately. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm so sorry. I should have recognized you from the funeral. No apology needed." He gestured to the empty office. "Was this Marcus Chen's?" Sarah's face tightened. "Yes. He left suddenly, about a month after." She trailed off. It was a difficult time for everyone. Did he and Tommy work together often? They were close, Sarah said carefully. Tommy, Marcus, and James Jr. were kind of a trio. Always taking lunch together, staying late to work on big cases. She paused. But after the accident, things changed. Marcus became different. Withdrawn. And James Jr.? Sarah glanced around nervously. Mr. Mitchell, I should get back to work. Please, David said softly. I'm just trying to understand. She hesitated, then pulled out a business card. I can't talk here. But if you want to know more about that time, about the changes I noticed, call me. After hours. David pocketed the card, his mind racing. Back in his car, he pulled out his phone and began searching. Marcus Chin had left a digital trail. LinkedIn showed his current position at a small firm across town. More importantly, his profile picture showed him wearing distinctive running shoes with red soles. But something else caught David's attention. In the experience section, Marcus listed a major case he'd worked on with Tommy and James Jr. The client was Red Star Development, one of the city's largest real estate companies. The case had settled just 2 days before Tommy's death. David's phone buzzed, a text from Ellen. Missing you? Coming home early tomorrow. Amy says hi. He stared at the message, guilt gnawing at his stomach. Ellen deserved to know what he'd discovered. But he needed more proof, more concrete evidence before reopening these wounds. The sun was setting as David drove to Marcus's new office. The building was modest, nothing like the gleaming tower downtown. Through the window, he could see a single light still burning. A man sat at a desk, head bowed over paperwork. David recognized him from the HR photos. Marcus Chin looked older than his years now, his face lined with stress. As David watched, Marcus opened his desk drawer and removed something, a small trowel, identical to the one from the surveillance footage. The pieces were falling into place, but they formed a picture David wasn't sure he was ready to see. He pulled out his phone and called the number on Sarah Lou's card. It rang twice before she answered. Ms. Lou? This is David Mitchell. I think it's time we had that talk. Her response chilled him to the bone. Mr. Mitchell, there's something you need to know about the Red Star case. About what really happened the night Tommy died. But we can't talk on the phone. They might be listening. The coffee shop Sarah Lou chose was 30 miles outside the city, a tiny place wedged between a laundromat and a shuttered video store. David arrived early, positioning himself at a corner table where he could watch both the entrance and the parking lot. The surveillance camera at Tommy's grave had taught him the value of careful observation. Sarah arrived at exactly 9 p.m., her corporate polish replaced by jeans and a worn leather jacket. She ordered nothing, sliding into the seat across from David with nervous energy radiating from every movement. I swept my car for bugs, she said without preamble. And I left my phone at home. You should turn yours off too. David raised an eyebrow but complied, powering down his device. You think we're being watched? I know we are. Sarah's fingers drummed against the table's scratched surface. Everyone at the firm has been since Tommy died. They call it security protocols, but it's really about control. About making sure nobody talks. About the Red Star case. Sarah's eyes widened. How do you know about that? I've been doing my homework. The case settled 2 days before Tommy's death. Marcus Chin was involved. So was James Whitaker Jr. It wasn't just any case. Sarah leaned forward, lowering her voice. It was supposed to be straightforward. Red Star wanted to develop some land on the east side. Old industrial site. They needed permits, environmental clearances, the usual stuff. David nodded, remembering headlines about the project. $1 billion development that would transform a struggling neighborhood. Tommy was handling the environmental compliance. Sarah continued. Marcus was on zoning, James Jr. supervised. Everything looked clean until Tommy found something in the soil samples. A chill ran down David's spine. What did he find? Contamination. Severe. cancer cluster-causing levels of toxic waste. The kind of thing that should have shut down the whole project. Sarah's voice trembled. But Red Star had already started selling units. They'd taken millions in deposits. And James Whitaker Sr. had personally guaranteed the project to his investors. What happened next? Tommy wanted to report it. Said we had an ethical obligation. Marcus agreed with him at first, but James Jr. convinced them to wait, to look for alternatives. She paused, glancing around the nearly empty coffee shop. They worked late that night, all three of them. Tommy called me around midnight, said he was heading to the Regulatory Commission's office. Said he'd found something else, something worse. David's coffee grew cold, untouched. But he never made it there. The next morning, they said he'd crashed his car. Too much rain, too much speed. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. But Tommy was the most careful driver I knew. He'd survived a rollover in college, always wore his seatbelt, never drove recklessly. And the contamination report? Disappeared. The final environmental assessment showed minimal risk. The project broke ground 3 months later. She reached into her jacket and withdrew a USB drive. But Tommy was thorough. He made copies. David stared at the small device. You've had this all along? I found it in my desk a week after the funeral. Hidden inside an old case file. I think Tommy knew something might happen to him. Her hand shook as she pushed the drive across the table. I wanted to come forward, but then Marcus started acting strange. And James Jr. took that sudden leave of absence. And the security upgrade started. Why tell me now? Because of Marcus. Sarah's voice dropped even lower. Last week, he came to my apartment. He was drunk, barely making sense. Kept saying he couldn't live with it anymore, that the guilt was eating him alive. That he'd been leaving messages at Tommy's grave, trying to find the courage to tell the truth. David's heart pounded. What truth? He wouldn't say exactly. But he mentioned the night Tommy died. Said there was a confrontation at the office. That James Jr. had threatened to destroy Tommy's career if he filed the report. That things got physical. She swallowed hard. And that someone followed Tommy's car that night. The implications hit David like a physical blow. Are you saying? I'm saying your son didn't die in an accident. Sarah stood abruptly. That USB drive contains Tommy's original reports, plus some photos he took of the site. But be careful, Mr. Mitchell. These people, they'll do anything to protect their investment. Wait, David called as she turned to leave. Why was Marcus leaving notes at the grave? Why not come forward? Sarah paused. Marcus's younger sister bought a condo in the Red Star development. Ground floor unit, perfect for her wheelchair. If the project got shut down, she'd lose everything. They knew exactly how to keep him quiet. After Sarah left, David sat alone in the coffee shop, the USB drive heavy in his pocket. Through the window, he watched late-night traffic pass, each set of headlights making him flinch. His phone remained off, but he knew Ellen would be worried. She was flying home tomorrow, expecting to find everything normal. Instead, he was unraveling a conspiracy that implicated one of the city's most powerful families. The drive home took twice as long as usual. David kept checking his rearview mirror, looking for signs of surveillance. The quiet suburban streets felt different now, hiding darker possibilities behind their well-maintained facades. In his office, David inserted the USB drive with trembling fingers. The files were exactly where Sarah said they'd be: detailed environmental reports, soil sample analyses, and a folder labeled contingency. Inside were dozens of photos showing barrels being moved at night, suspicious liquids seeping into groundwater, and documents that traced the deadly legacy of corporate negligence. The last file was a video, timestamped the night Tommy died. David clicked play, his throat tight. Tommy's face filled the screen, his expression grave. If you're watching this, something's happened to me. The Red Star situation is worse than we thought. It's not just contamination, it's deliberate. They knew about the toxins when they bought the land. They'd been dumping more, using the construction to hide it. James Sr. is involved, goes back decades. I'm taking everything to the commission tonight, but... He paused, running a hand through his hair. Dad, if you're the one who finds this, I'm sorry. I know how much this will hurt you and Mom. But some things are worth dying for. The video ended. David sat in the darkness, his son's last words echoing in his mind. Outside, a car door slammed. Footsteps approached his front door. The doorbell rang once, then again. David looked at his phone, still powered off. Ellen wasn't due home until tomorrow. Whoever was at the door at this hour had a different purpose entirely. The doorbell rang a third time as David quickly copied Tommy's files to his laptop. His hands moved with practiced efficiency. Decades of engineering work had taught him to stay methodical even under pressure. The USB drive disappeared into his pocket just as heavy knocking began. Mr. Mitchell? A familiar voice called through the door. It's Marcus Chin. Please, I know you visited the office today. We need to talk. David's mind raced. Marcus was the grave visitor, the one leaving notes of guilt and remorse. But was he here alone? And could he be trusted? The knocking continued, more urgent now. I'm alone, Marcus called, as if reading David's thoughts. Sarah told me she gave you the files. There are things you need to know, things I should have told you 2 years ago. David opened the door but left the security chain engaged. Marcus stood on the porch, his expensive suit replaced by casual clothes, his face haggard in the porch light. No sign of anyone else in the darkness behind him. How did you find my address? The same way I found Tommy's grave, Marcus said quietly. I've been watching, waiting for the right moment. When Sarah called to warn me you were asking questions, I knew it was time. David studied him for a long moment before closing the door, removing the chain, and letting him in. Marcus entered cautiously, his movements tense with nervous energy. You were there the night Tommy died, David said. It wasn't a question. Marcus sank into a chair, suddenly looking much older than his 30 years. Yes. We all were, me, Tommy, and James Jr. The Red Star evidence was just the beginning. Tommy had uncovered something much bigger, a pattern going back decades. James Sr. hadn't just known about the contamination, he'd been profiting from it. Charging other companies to dump their toxic waste on his properties, then developing them into residential zones. The video Tommy left, David said. He mentioned it was deliberate. Marcus's head snapped up. He left a video? Where? On the drive Sarah gave me. Along with all his original reports. David watched Marcus carefully. He knew something might happen to him. James Jr. threatened him that night. Marcus continued, his voice thick with guilt. Said he'd destroy Tommy's career, make sure he never practiced law again. But Tommy wouldn't back down. He was going to expose everything, the dumping, the cover-ups, the bribes to inspection officials. What happened next? Tommy left around midnight, heading for the Regulatory Commission's office. He had a contact there, someone who would act on the evidence immediately. Marcus's hands began to shake. James Jr. was furious. He called his father, then ordered me to follow Tommy, to stop him somehow. David felt ice in his veins. Did you? I tried to catch up to him on River Road. The rain was getting worse. I flashed my lights, trying to get him to pull over. Marcus's voice cracked. But there was another car, black SUV, no plates. It came out of nowhere, forced Tommy toward the guardrail. I saw his brake lights, saw him try to correct, but... You watched my son die, David said softly, dangerously. And then helped cover it up. They had everything on video, me following him, flashing my lights. James Sr. made it clear, play along with the accident story, or face accessory charges. Marcus pulled out his phone, fingers trembling as he pulled up a video. But I recorded everything that night. Every conversation, every threat. Including this. The phone showed a dimly lit office. James Jr. stood at a desk, his face flushed with anger. You're making a mistake, Tommy. Think about your career, your future. Tommy's voice was steel. People are dying, James. Cancer rates in those neighborhoods are through the roof. Kids are getting sick. Your father isn't just breaking environmental laws, he's committing murder. My father built this city. Who are you two? I'm an officer of the court. Tommy interrupted. And I took an oath to uphold the law. So did you, or have you forgotten that? The video ended. Marcus looked up with tears in his eyes. I've been carrying this for 2 years, trying to find the courage to come forward. The notes at the grave, they were my way of asking Tommy's forgiveness. But it's not enough. It was never enough. David stood, moving to the window. A car drove slowly past the house, its headlights sweeping across the front lawn. Why now? Why take the risk of exposing everything? Because they're doing it again, Marcus said urgently. Red Star just announced 3 new developments, all on reclaimed industrial sites. The same pattern, the same cover-ups. More families buying homes built on poison. I can't let more people die. David's phone buzzed. Ellen, wondering why he wasn't answering her calls. The weight of everything he'd learned pressed down on him. The contamination, the cover-up, the deliberate murder of his son. Tommy had died trying to protect innocent people, trying to expose a decades-long criminal enterprise. I need your help, Mr. Mitchell, Marcus said. The video alone isn't enough, it only shows the argument. But combined with Tommy's evidence, with my testimony about that night. He swallowed hard. James Sr. is untouchable, but James Jr. isn't. He gave the order to follow Tommy. He called his father. He orchestrated the cover-up. We can bring him down, get justice for Tommy. Another car passed the house, slower this time. David recognized the black SUV from Marcus's description. They were being watched. Ellen's flying home tomorrow, David said quietly. If we do this, if we go public, everyone we love becomes a target. Marcus stood. Tommy knew the risks. He chose to act anyway, because it was right. Because some things are worth dying for. He pulled out a business card. I have a contact at the FBI's Environmental Crimes Division. One call, and everything comes out, the evidence, my testimony, all of it. But it has to be your decision, Mr. Mitchell. Tommy was your son. David looked at the photos on his wall. Tommy growing up, Tommy graduating, Tommy becoming the man who would give his life fighting for justice. The man who had recorded a final message, knowing he might not survive to deliver it himself. The black SUV passed again, its tinted windows reflecting the streetlights. Soon, Ellen would be home, and David would have to explain everything. But first, he had a choice to make. He picked up his phone, the weight of 2 years of grief and lies and hidden truths behind every word. What's your contact's number? Marcus smiled for the first time that night. There's something else you should know, Mr. Mitchell. Something that will change everything. The person who ordered that SUV to run Tommy off the road? It wasn't James Sr. or Jr., it was. The window exploded inward, and Marcus Chen's last words were lost in a spray of glass and blood. David dove for cover as another shot shattered the remaining window. Marcus lay motionless on the floor, blood pooling beneath him. In the chaos, one thought crystallized in David's mind, the USB drive. He had to protect Tommy's evidence. The house phone rang, an old landline he never disconnected. On the third ring, the answering machine picked up, and a familiar voice filled the room. David? It's Sarah Lou. Don't trust Marcus. He's been working with Patricia Wong from HR. She's James Sr.'s sister-in-law. They know about The message cut off as another bullet struck the answering machine. David Army crawled toward his office, his engineer's mind racing. The house had a back exit through the garage. If he could reach it. Mr. Mitchell? A woman's voice called from outside. This can end 2 ways. Give us the drive and the video, and you can return to your quiet life. Ellen never needs to know how her son really died. Patricia Wong. The HR director who'd shown him Tommy's class photo. Who'd watched him ask about Marcus Chen. Who'd alerted someone to start following him? Why? David called back, playing for time as he inched toward his office. Tommy was trying to save lives. Those developments are finishing people. Progress requires sacrifice. Patricia responded coldly. The Red Star projects have revitalized entire neighborhoods. Think of the greater good. David reached his office doorway. Through the broken window, he could see figures moving in the darkness, at least 3 of them. The black SUV was parked across his driveway. His cell phone buzzed silently in his pocket. Ellen's text lit up the screen. Flight landed early. Taking a taxi home. See you in 20 minutes. Red heart. 20 minutes. He had to end this before Ellen arrived. Had to protect her from this nightmare. But first, David lunged for his desk, grabbing his laptop. He had copied Tommy's files, including the video. If he could just upload them somewhere public. A figure appeared in the office doorway. James Whitaker Jr., his expensive suit incongruous with the gun in his hand. It was supposed to be simple, he said, almost conversationally. Marcus was going to retrieve the drive, explain everything. No mess, no complications. Like Tommy's death? David's fingers moved across the keyboard, muscle memory from years of typing reports. One click would send the files to every major news outlet in the country. That was... James Jr. paused. Unfortunate. Tommy was my friend. He just couldn't see the bigger picture. The bigger picture of profit from poison? David's voice shook with rage. Of children dying from cancer so your family could get richer? You don't understand. Red Star isn't just a company, it's a legacy. My grandfather started it, built it from nothing. The contaminated sites, the dumping, it was all for the future. For progress. Progress, a new voice said from the shadows. Is that what we're calling murder now, Junior? David's heart stopped. He knew that voice. Had heard it every Sunday at the cemetery for the past 2 years. Ellen Mitchell stepped into the office, holding a small revolver with the steady hands of someone who knew how to use it. Ellen? David whispered. How? Did you think you were the only one investigating Tommy's death? Ellen's eyes never left James Jr. While you were tracking Marcus, I was following the money. Red Star's toxic legacy. The cancer clusters. The covered-up deaths. I found Tommy's contact at the Regulatory Commission. She told me everything. Mrs. Mitchell. James Jr. started, but Ellen cut him off. I knew Tommy was onto something big. He called me the night he died, said he had proof of criminal conspiracy. Asked me to be his backup if anything went wrong. Her voice hardened. I've spent 2 years getting close to your father, James. Joining his charity boards. Attending his parties. Winning his trust. And you know what I learned? It wasn't your father who ordered the hit on my son. James Jr.'s face went pale. What? It was your mother, Ellen said. Patricia's sister. The real power behind Red Star. She couldn't let your father's empire crumble, couldn't let her perfect family be exposed. So she made a call, arranged an accident, and kept the family legacy intact. Outside, sirens began to wail in the distance. They have everything, Ellen continued. Every document, every email, every recording. I was their confidential informant. Tonight was supposed to be the takedown, but you jumped the gun with Marcus. She glanced at David. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you, honey. Had to keep you safe. Keep you natural. David stared at his wife of 35 years, seeing her in an entirely new light. While he'd been cleaning Tommy's grave every Sunday, she'd been methodically dismantling the conspiracy that finished him. James Jr.'s gun wavered. You're lying. Check your phone, Ellen said calmly. The FBI is raiding Red Star's offices right now. Your mother's house too. It's over, James. The only question is, do you want to add more murder to the charges? The sirens grew louder. Through the broken window, David could see red and blue lights reflecting off neighboring houses. James Jr. looked like a cornered animal, his perfect life crumbling around him. He was my friend. James Jr. whispered, lowering his gun. I didn't know they would finish him. I just wanted him to stop to understand. Hands where we can see them. FBI agents swarmed through the house, weapons drawn. Patricia Wong and her team outside were already in custody. Later, as crime scene technicians photographed Marcus's body and collected evidence, David and Ellen sat on their front porch, wrapped in shock blankets. 2 years, David said softly. You played the grieving mother while hunting them down. Tommy died trying to expose the truth. Ellen replied, taking his hand. I had to finish what he started. Had to make sure no other parent would go through this. David squeezed her hand, remembering the countless times she'd brought roses to Tommy's grave. What happens now? Justice happens now, Ellen said firmly. The FBI has recordings of Charlotte Whitaker ordering the hit. James Jr. will probably turn state's evidence. Red Star will be exposed, the development shut down, the victims compensated. David thought of the camera he'd found at Tommy's grave, the discovery that had started everything. Did you know about Marcus's visits? The notes? I had the camera installed, Ellen admitted. Needed to document his guilt, his confessions. Tommy always said the best evidence is what people say when they think no one's listening. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Crime scene tape fluttered in the morning breeze. Soon, reporters would arrive, and the quiet life they'd known would be gone forever. But as David held his wife's hand, he felt something he hadn't experienced since Tommy's death: peace. Their son had died fighting for justice, and they had finished his fight. The truth was out, the guilty would be punished, and somewhere, David hoped, Tommy was smiling. He would be proud of you, David whispered to Ellen. He'd be proud of us both, she replied. Sometimes the greatest acts of love are the ones we do in silence. Together, they watched the new day dawn, knowing that while nothing could bring Tommy back, his death had not been in vain. The truth had finally come to light, emerging like the morning sun, unstoppable, cleansing, and ultimately healing.